Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Dave Tree.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. I'm your co-host, Mark Newbold, and joining me today is somebody that joins me every episode, or at least every live episode in the studio. I'm going to let him do his own introduction because I haven't got a good one this week. So, Dave, introduce yourself. Tell us something that nobody knows about you.
Well, I was gonna do some trumpet noises, but then you came out with that, and I wasn't expecting it. So, tell you something that nobody else knows about me. I've got 3 kidneys. There you go.
Wow, I've only got 1, so now I know where the other one went.
Yeah. So, ta-da! Hi everyone, it's Dave from All the Cool Stuff, and it's been a couple of weeks since we last done the last episode because there's been some very big things happening in the last few weeks. You turn on any social media, well for me at least, any social media platform, and it is completely littered with various pictures, responses, thoughts and things like that, all to do with a TV show that started doing the rounds in the United States, but but nobody's been talking about the game.
The game? I haven't, and I want to get it. I do want to get it. But you make a good point. Everywhere you go on social media, there's Star Wars. Every time I buy anything, weirdly enough, it's got Star Wars on it. And I want to get the game. I know if I get the game, I won't have time to play it. Right, especially right now, leading into and there's a film coming out as well. You know, leading up to all that, and this TV series we keep alluding to. We're in the UK. We don't have Disney Plus. How could we have possibly seen this 3 episodes of majestic television? I couldn't possibly say. But spoiler alert, if you've not seen it, if you don't want to know anything about it, if you're a UK listener and you're not going to watch it until March 31st, maybe now's the time to do something else for 15 minutes. Dave, your thoughts, initial thoughts on The Mandalorian, just as a whole. We've seen 3 episodes as we speak. What's your gut feeling about the show so far?
I'm very impressed. Got all the hallmarks to do what I feel Rebels did for Star Wars. By that, what I mean is recruiting people into Star Wars and creating icons within it. Now, I will say it's extremely well done, brilliant, you know, in terms of the budget and things like that. There are a few things that have kind of made me wince a little bit, but I get why they're doing it, because trying to get the wider audience. Out of the 3 episodes, if I was to pick best to last, 2, 1, 3, as in my favourite to least favourite. But I do think it's what we've always wanted, and it sounds like I'm being hard on it. You know, this is the first live action TV series, and I want it to carry on. I'd rather see this than animated, but I get that animated, it opens it up huge. You got way more that you can do within animation, and then they proved that with Clone Wars.
Yeah.
They really that blew away all the expectations. Rebels got there, but it was almost like a reset because you didn't have the same assets. That was for Disney, whereas the other one was with Cartoon Network and things like that. You couldn't use the same stuff again. I'll pass it over to you. I want us to jointly discuss. It's not all about me, Mark. What did you think?
I mean, it's all about you, Dave. That's why I'm here. I've been putting old lightsaber interviews on the site every Sunday for 18 months now. And a lot of the interviews from 2007, 2008 were basically one of the questions I would ask all the guests was, what are you looking forward to in the TV show? Because we were supposed to get Star Wars Underworld back then, and we were just waiting for the Clone Wars. And of course, Clone Wars happened and Underworld didn't. So now to have a show that is set in the Underworld to the level of quality we're getting is just phenomenal. One thing I like about the social media aspect at the moment is that people are really getting into it. Obviously, there's a certain diminutive character we will talk about in a bit that everyone's going loopy about, which is fantastic. But it's being treated like the Second Coming, and it's not. It's very early days. It's with 3 episodes into an 8-episode first season. It could all go south very quickly if they put the foot wrong. My gut tells me that they won't. But what I've seen so far, I love the lead character. I like the fact that he's not infallible. That second episode lit me up because I watched it the first time and there was an element of me thinking, blimey, that's early for a filler episode. It felt like a filler episode. Then I watched it again. I was like, there's so much going on in this that I didn't pick up on the first time.
Yeah.
And I've seen each episode multiple times and I get more out of it each time I watch it, which is a good sign.
I will say, within 24 hours, I asked Brian if he'd had seen it yet, and Brian said response was he's seen it 5 times. Now, Brian is a hard person to please.
Very.
And for him to say that he's seen something 5 times within 24 hours is like, wow, that's pretty cool. You know, it's got to be good. But like, yeah, no, I totally get what you mean on that. There is so much going on in there that you have to watch it more than once, you know, to really appreciate the level of production and detail that they've gone into on this.
And it felt like there was a comfort in it in a good way. And there's bits that are negatives, but I think they're more thematic and storyline, which make some sort of sense. I got the feeling that obviously Filoni's the safest pair of hands in Star Wars, and that was sort of borne out by the Vanity Fair interview recently, where you know Kathleen Kennedy was saying we run everything past Dave. You know, he's a barometer for what they do, and obviously he only has a certain level of control, but it's a pair of eyes that looks like Star Wars, that feels like Star Wars, or whatever it may be. That Favreau's come in, and he's been involved peripherally since 2008 when he voiced, you know, he was there when Filoni was kicking off the Clone Wars at Skywalker Ranch and he showed him Iron Man and all that stuff. So he's been around it. He played Pre Vizsla and he's voiced a character in episode 3, Paz Vizsla, which was kind of cool that he voiced a character. You know, so he's got a handle on it. He's clearly a fan. But then everyone's a fan. It's easy to say you're a Star Wars fan. It's the most obvious thing in the world. The fact that they got the look of it and the stylistics, and we saw the behind-the-scenes stuff that they physically built the Razor Crest and didn't do it as a CG model. Now that's cool. That's like going back and merging the two optical and digital styles together and making it feel more real. I love that. The music's phenomenal. I mean, my favourite Star Wars soundtrack right now is Solo. I play that every day. I can't get the Mandalorian off my player at the moment because I just think it's fantastic music. I love it. So there's all these little touches like that. We're seeing a lot more legacy aliens in this as well, post Return of the Jedi era.
Thank God.
Which is so cool. We've seen Jawas, we've seen Nikto, we've seen Rhodians, we've seen all sorts of stuff. So already we're kind of it feels more Star Wars. And I get why the sequel trilogy wanted to step away, because it's a big galaxy, but on the flip side, they've made it a small galaxy. So why not just go with it with characters that we know? The character himself, he does make mistakes. I mean, episode 2, I mentioned it a minute ago, it's littered with cock-ups. You know, leaving his ship out there when you know he walked past Jawas in the town, so he knows Jawas are out there, and then he leaves his ship alone and it gets stripped, and it's like, really? You know, that's like basic sort of smuggling 101 if you're playing role-play games, like secure the ship. You know, it's like D&D, check for traps, you know, secure the ship. I spent more money when I used to role-play regularly, I spent more money on my ship in security systems than I did in weapons, because you just know there's somebody out there trying to nick your ship. He's not infallible. That was like, really was a rookie error. The third episode, when his ramp's open, it's like, you left your ramp open? Really? But then I'm sure they'll retcon some reason why he did it, or, you know, oh, he was laying a trap for the guy, la 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 la. But there's just all these little things that I'm not, he's not all powerful, he's not all knowing, he's not all seeing. He gets his ass kicked in episode 2. I mean, he really does get taken to town. But it was like Indy, he just kept getting up, kept going. It's like, I've got more respect for the guy because he won't go down. Just loved all of it. Loved it.
For me, the big plus points, and I hate when you see things, particularly on social media, are infectious, that people then start borrowing and saying certain phrases. So there's certain things that people say that like literally make me want to like shoot them. And when I see world building, universe building, it's kind of like the world is already built. The universe is already built. We've actually had lots of films, lots of cartoons, lots of
computer
novels,
games,
computer games. You know,
comics,
it's like it's there. What you got to use is like the assets that have been created for it.
Yeah.
Reason is that episode 2 is my favourite so far. Is not because of the cute, you know, MacGuffin. Is because in that half an hour you got to learn more about and see Jawas more than you have up to this point in any other film. And it was reminiscent to me of Jawas of Doom from like the old Marvel comic, where they find Fett spat out by the Sarlacc pit, and Fett doesn't know who he is, he's got no recollection. It's a really great Marvel comic from back in the 80s. But you just literally got to see them hightail off. You got to see the sandcrawler in action. You know, they're opening up hatches and throwing stuff out at him. You know, how desperate it is, but also how silly. And then when he gets to the top and they're all just there and it zap and he then just like falls back down. But they were also real dicks. You know, they were absolute, you know, like literally provoking him at every possible opportunity, from, you know, when they sat down and started having a conversation and then telling him, oh, you're Jawas, you sound like a Wookiee and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
To when they're driving along, he bumps his head because it's a small cockpit and they're like laughing at him and all this sort of stuff, you know, all the time. You know, you realize that, yeah, Jawas are real jerks. You know, they really are jerks about everything. Yeah. And then they kind of give up. They go, you know, and then he comes back with the egg. And then the first thing they do is, you know, it reminds me of District 9, and they're all going crazy for tin of dog food. And like seeing the Jawas there with like the egg, it was a little bit of that. And I was like, this is absolutely fantastic. That is taking what we've got and then expanding on it in a way that you've not seen before. And there was all like references in there with like that front bit of the ramp coming down where you had like that Macquarie picture of, you know, them all lined up and they're all like exchanging their goods, you know, by sunset. You know,
there's all, mate.
Yeah. So there's all like these really nice little bits and pieces, and then bringing in characters like Nick Nolte as an Ugnaught. You know, again, fringe aliens that you only really saw in Empire, and that was about it. But you're then bringing them in, and then it was almost a reference to where he is because he's paid his debt of servitude, you know, broken free and things like that. I thought, you know, it's like little tiny things like that I think are really, really great, that are sometimes, to me, more interesting than the actual main story arc itself. Episode 1 was very great. For me, the highlight of that was the Snoot Flute with Karen Dan or the Goobaz. I thought that was just like, you know, I was just like, what the hell is that? But, I thought that was really great. And IG-11, the way that moved was very fluid in combat. So good. Sort of like the scanning around and moving and then taking the shots. But then outside of like the combat, it was then almost like stop animation, very like stilted and jerky. I thought, you know, that is great. And I would be gutted if they're just going to leave that there after episode 1, because you've developed all of that and now he's got a real grudge to hold against the Mandalorian if they do bring him back, which they got to bring him back. Why would you invest all of that into that character?
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the Force be with you.
However, the things I'm not too thrilled about is actually the whole kind of Mandalorian thing. Yeah. Now, this is going to make me really unpopular, I'm sure, because everybody's, no. But it's kind of strange how many times Filoni will U-turn on the whole Mandalorian history. You had post Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith a lot going into the kind of like history of like the Mandalorians and stuff like that. You had Karen Traviss create like the Republic Commando novels and things like that, and they were revered, and she kind of like almost made a blueprint for, you know, where they came from and things like that. Then that was, no, we're not doing any of that. They're now pacifists. And then bringing in the Black Watch, when you then see them come Rebels, they're kind of like almost anything but what you saw set up in Clone Wars. And now what you're seeing them in the TV series are like anything remotely connected to like back where. Now I know that there's the Civil War and things like that tore them apart and whatever other galactic events, but to have this incredibly well trained, incredibly well armored bunch of people, not necessarily guys, hidden out of plain sight, makes no sense to me. Especially with their warrior culture, they would either be mercenaries or for hire or anything like this, and they're living in politics, and yet still have access to all this incredible weaponry and stuff like that. That come the end of the 3rd episode, I was just kind of like, it was desperate, and it was like, oh, how's this going to work out? And then when they all just like appeared, I was just like, oh, what? everybody loved it, and everybody's like saying, you know, as it should be, or whatever is the phrase, which again is a signpost of what Filoni's like doing in this, that you're coining catchphrases. So just as you got the I have spoken, yeah, it is the way, there you go. These have been brought in, which then build familiarity and spread, you know. Yeah. So again, it is a technique to like recruit people on board. You know,
it's very hashtagable, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. For the modern day, which you never would normally have. But the fact that you then had all these guys, and it's kind of like, what? It felt forced, and to me, it felt like it let it down. And you have the armourer, which is cool, and she talks in riddles and mystery of like, what does it mean? But yet she can knock up this armour pretty much straight away. And when he came out in his fully Beskar armoured plated thing, it was kind of like, well, that's a bit quick. You know, like, it's like, wow, you know, where we were just talking about the Jawas and things like that, that's convincing. The Mandalorian culture in this, to me, at this point, I'm not convinced by it. You know, it just doesn't make quite the sense that it should do.
But it felt early in the season for that to happen, in the sense that, you know, he's been going to this coven, I think they called it a coven, getting his armour done, so he had his shoulder plate done in the first episode, and second episode got his chest plate kicked to bits by the Mudhorn. And
that makes sense, yeah? So you're building it up bit by bit. Now all of a sudden he's Iron Man, you know, and he walks out, and to like, literally like the Iron Man references at the end, right at the end, I was just like, oh no! You know?
I know what you're getting at. The thing with the Mandalorian culture is that we picked up a lot very, very, very early on, that Boba Fett was, and of course now they've changed the history, so now people who aren't into Fett will go, he's not a Mandalorian anyway, and the people who are a bit sniffy about it. I think my gut tells you the way they're going, because the Mandalorian himself was a foundling. You saw that Clone Wars era flashback, you saw the super battle droid, you saw the droid ship fly over, you've seen all these things, so you know he was around during the Clone Wars. His parents appear to have been killed. Was he a young Mandalorian? Don't think so, because they weren't wearing the armour, so he was found. Well, Boba Fett was a clone of Jango Fett, who wasn't a Mandalorian himself either, so it kind of feels to me like this whole foundling thing that the armourer seems very invested in, about bringing new people into the culture, will kind of rescind the snottiness towards Boba Fett not actually being a true-blood Mandalorian. So I think there's a storyline there, and we had all those, you know, all those early stories about, Boba Fett was really just a Mareel, he was a journeyman protector from Concord Dawn, and all these different stories you heard back in the day, and it was all myth and myth and myth. And I hope they don't over-explain too much. You know what I mean? That's why I'm kind of glad that the Josh Trank Boba Fett film never got made, because you just know that they would have done a Judge Dredd where he would have took his helmet off and all that stuff. I don't think you're ever going to see, unless he gets killed and somebody takes the armour off him, I don't think you're going to see Pedro Pascal's face in this TV series. He clearly doesn't mind.
It'll be the last shot of the season.
Or it'll be a money shot for something. Exactly. Yeah. The Mando stuff I'm fine with. I don't mind it. I kind of like the fact they've gone underground, because all these different things have happened to them, and you've had the Galactic Civil War has ended for the most part, you know, and the galaxy's now sort of sliding down the toilet. Rogue Imperial governors and all these different things. The galaxy's more battered than it's ever been. But it just felt very early in the season for that arising, you know, that, like, we're coming out of hiding. And the Mandalorian himself said, well, that's the Coven gone. We're going to have to move on. So they're going to move on from that planet. But that's another thing. I'm conscious that, I know from a financial point of view and from a real world point of view, it's easier to build stuff in CG. It's still expensive, but it's easier to build in CG than it is to build for real. And we've already had 2 episodes on this planet, and we had 2 episodes on Arvala 7, where Kirill was, who was fantastic. So I really want them to get out there, and I want him to start travelling. So the next episode, it sounded like he was heading for a bounty on a water planet. So that would be fascinating. But even today, with today's techniques, water is really expensive to do. So it's not as easy, not even as easy as that.
Not if you're borrowing assets from Rise of Skywalker.
True.
Just as, and it does happen, just as the Ghost appeared, you know, that was their rendering used in Rogue One, wasn't it?
Well, it's like the Hammerhead Corvette in Rogue One, wasn't it? Was just taken from Rebels, I think.
but it's their renderings, isn't it? So by that, and that's
they
what
just reskinned it. Yeah,
that's what I was trying to say with Clone Wars, where that was under a different management structure. They couldn't use any of that. They had to kind of build these things from scratch again. And then as you go deeper into the seasons and things like that, you can see like textures are more complex, landscapes are more complex. Whereas you look at that Rebels now, it's really dated very fast. Clone Wars hasn't, because it just had all of that stuff there. Oh, sorry. The early episodes of Clone Wars has, but like the later ones haven't dated, because there's just so much going on, and it's like, wow.
Oh, they were spending $2 million an episode, I think, on Clone Wars at the end. It was silly money, but Rebels was of hundreds of thousands. It was a different scale.
But now they've got all of that. They've got access to, these things. So you say that, but it might not be as crazy as you think, because arguably, up to this point, you would never have thought that you'd see what you've seen in the space of 3 episodes. So,
incredibly so. And I think it's got to give, I would imagine it gives most people real excitement and hope. One, the 3rd episode was beautifully directed, and just everything about the way the things was framed and the way it was all pulled together was wonderful. And Deborah Chow is going to be working on Kenobi, so that gives a lot of optimism. And just to see where the Mandalorian takes his asset, if you want to call it that.
Fantatrax.
No other way of describing him other than Baby Yoda. What do you make of Baby Yoda so far?
It's funny, talking with people, they call it all different things. I've just called it yodeling. Yodeling.
Exactly, I did the same, yeah.
I think my favourite one is Boda.
Yes, I've seen Boda around, yeah.
I think that's quite good. So, again, this is the cynic in me again saying about recruiting people. By having that as little MacGuffin, so to speak, is what draws in a whole crowd of people. And it's worked. All of a sudden you've got people who are absolutely loving this character without it really kind of doing anything other than being cute. And there are some genuinely funny moments where he's trying to like reach out and help heal him, and he's like picking up and putting him in the thing. I've been quite harsh on the 3rd episode, but only the things that I didn't really kind of like gel towards. I absolutely loved the throttle knob thing, and then, at the end he just like screws it off and gives it to him. That little subtleties and things like that, I think, are when it works brilliantly, because it's not literally like forced into you. It's like little tiny clever things, and that's what builds character, and that's what builds that relationship between those two with whatever it kind of ends up being. Yeah. Because the moment you had, 2nd season, everyone was, it's like Lone Wolf and Cub, and again, the social media hive mind, everybody then starts saying the same thing. It's kind of like, have you ever even seen
Lone Wolf?
Read anything about it, or are you just saying that because someone else like said it 20 minutes ago, and now it's in your head that you think all this stuff? Just as in the 1st episode, all the music is like, that's Sergio
Leone,
Leone, like from like the Western
Ennio
films.
Morricone, yeah,
that's it. Sorry, it's not Sergio. We're all experts on all of this stuff. All of a sudden, whenever anything comes out, it doesn't matter what it is. Yoda, it's done very, very clever. However, the way that they've done the eyes, do Yoda's as a species, his pupils dilate as he gets older. I've just come off the back of watching Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, and it's more like a gelfling. You had like these gelflings that lived underground, but like it's more like one of those than like what you saw of Yaddle and Yoda, because of the eyes are dark, and it's kind of very Pokemon-like as well. And this is what I mean, that it's been designed in a way to appeal to a wider audience, whereas, if you'd ask someone to like kind of draw a baby Yoda, it wouldn't look like that. If you see what I mean. So it's done almost Pokemon-like to appeal to those people. It's done very cutesy, and it's lovable. You cannot fault it. It's so cool and very nice. And the jokes of it, swallowing the frog and stuff like that, and playing with a gear stick and trying to heal him. It's brilliant. It's very, very clever, but it's done in a way that I feel is to bring people on board, and it's worked, because the fact that you couldn't keep that quiet, and I feel very sorry for people who have yet to see these things. It's inevitably being spoilt for them by everyone. What are your thoughts on Boda, Yoda, yodeling, Baby Yoda?
When I saw him, well, assuming it's a him, I think the Doctor does say him, doesn't he? For the first time. And there's plenty of questions there, because he's got the Camino badge on his shirt, so there's a cloning element being brought into this somewhere. When I first saw him, I was surprised. I didn't expect that, because that was always an off-limits thing for George, was that you never know what species Yoda is.
You had that Topps card, didn't you? And they didn't they? Well,
with them all bowing to the statue, yes.
Yeah.
Galaxy, was it Galaxy 2, was it, I think? It was a promo card, I think. Anyway, that was always off-limits. It was that and Obi-Wan's specific history they always steered clear of. So I always thought at some point there might be a Yoda project. So to bring this character in, and obviously all the fan theories are knocking about, it's a clone of Yoda, blah, 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 blah. But that surprised me for how it's been done. What's really working for me, one, I kind of, that whole Lone Wolf and Cub thing, I do kind of get the sense of what people are referring to, because I remember reading the comic way back when, and an adaptation, and of course it was like Shogun Assassin. So there's things I saw years and years ago that kind of rung a bell. But it's the animation work on that creature is just phenomenal. There's so many little moments and little looks he gives, and just reactions, and of course Pascal's playing it brilliantly as well, considering the guy's got a helmet on, exactly what he's thinking, tip of the head or tilt or whatever, just conveys the right emotion. So those two things working in concert is really working for me. I know some people have said the Mandalorian has built this awesome reputation, which he clearly has, and he's one of those guys, he won't stop till he gets his objective done. So again, that's very Fett-like, and he's got this amazing reputation. Why would he risk throwing it all away for this particular asset? I don't know yet. I guess that's what we're going to find out over the next few episodes, but I'm kind of invested in wanting to know why he would go to such lengths. There's obviously more of a connection to the Yodeling's background, or there's something that's triggering him. I always remember reading way back when Han Solo basically said the only thing he wouldn't traffic was slaves. That was always the thing for Han Solo. I'm sure Disney would like to retcon it, but Han Solo was a drug smuggler. That's what Spice was. Han Solo was a drug smuggler. So, you can't get around it. There's these harsh realities of Star Wars. Some of these people did questionable things. And for Solo, it was part of his redemption story, if you want to call it that. And I always got the sense he was quite happy doing what he was doing. I didn't feel like he needed redeeming, but that was the angle they took. But for the Mandalorian, it's like, you've seen him, we've already seen him take out about 40 people in 3 episodes and blacken Jawas to bits. Why he would waste those projectiles on Jawas, I don't know. But nevertheless, we understand the no disintegrations line from Empire a bit better now. And Empire seems to be the real template for me. IG-88 and Mandalorian, IG-11 rather, standing in the doorway when they've taken on all those Niktos in episode 1, that gunfight. Clearly the silhouettes are supposed to evoke IG-88 and Boba Fett. It's pretty clear that they're giving you that sense, and seeing a Yodeling or whatever you would want to call it, and lots of very evocative original trilogy touches. I'm looking forward to seeing, and we've seen some flashbacks to the Clone Wars as we mentioned. I like that. I'm hoping we see some stuff that foreshadows things that we're going to see later on, So I just get the feeling that this is sitting in a really sweet area of Star Wars that we've not really delved into. 6 years after Jedi, you've already had the New Republic mentioned by Grief Karga, which the Mandalorian sort of snorts at. Yeah. So there's lots of little touches that are working really good, but I'm really curious to see what happens now with this Yoda character, this Yodeling character, because he was handed in, he's took the bounty, he's gone back on his word, so he's broken a creed there. Now he's clearly back with these Mando people who have sort of got his back again, whereas maybe they didn't before, because there was obviously tension.
Is that because he was a he was a bounty hunter? Because there was a reference that only one person gets to go above ground or whatever. Is that because he's working for bounty rather than...
Well, he got the Imperial stamp on the Beskar. It wasn't too good, did it? So, and also, I mean, I'm sure, I know that they're never going to hint at it if they can get away with it. And they're always going to tease, but I can't see how Fett won't come into it at some point.
Yeah, given that Ahsoka can now time travel and never die, it's reasonable to say that, and Maul, and also now the Emperor. Yeah. So
I'm waiting for Dooku to come back. I'm waiting for Dooku's head like the Thing. I'm going to have little legs going out the bottom of his head.
It'll be Greedo. He actually had a bulletproof vest on or something like that.
Yeah.
Be like old man Greedo. But yeah, it's going to happen.
What will the explanation for Fett be? Will Fett be a legend to the Mandalorians, or will he be a nuisance? Because common vernacular is like, oh, he's not really a Mandalorian, he's just wearing the armour. Well, they're all human, they're not alien, so my headcanon of being a Mandalorian is a bit like being a traveller.
He will be the person who's contracted the Imperial Governor. He'll be the one behind that, and that's why you got the Camino guy involved, and so, it will turn out that ultimately Fett is the one behind it all, because he's probably not a big fan of the New Republic.
I'm Anthony Daniels, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
I just think back to when Dooku found Django on the moon of Bogdan and determined that he was the perfect specimen to clone into a clone army. What was it about Django that was perfect? He wasn't actually a Mandalorian, as it turns out. So there's all these elements that make you wonder, did Dooku know that he wasn't a Mandalorian? Because that was always a thing way back in the day, back late 70s, early 80s, Mandalorian super commandos, and there was going to be loads of them, but that never quite came to fruition. That's what people thought the prequels would have as an element, but they never did. So, do you think Filoni's taken some old Lucas thoughts and thought, well, maybe at some juncture in The Mandalorian, cloning comes into it, and they do clone an army of Mandalorian super commando. You know what I mean? I just wonder whether that is going to come into it. They did it with Django and it worked. All those clones, and they put Order 66 in their head so they couldn't disobey. It just makes me wonder whether they're going to go down a similar path with actual Mandalorians, and could you clone a Mandalorian to be obedient? Because they're clearly skilled to an incredibly high level, so I just wonder where they're going to take that.
The Jango Fett video game, which I don't know if still counts as canon or not, but that was all about Django versus Montrose.
Yeah.
And Dooku kind of it was a job to find who was the better out of the two to become the template for the clones. The game itself, Dooku was doing all these bounties and these trials to try and find who is the best template for it. And it ended up being versus Montrose, who was another bounty hunter. And it was kind of sort of whittling down to who it was going to be. Now, given that you've got the Kamino guy, given that you've got the yodeling, and you've got the whole, the Empire needs to kind of build itself up, I do think you are going to see some form of cloning element in there, and that could be built towards that. Who's to say that the water planet, because Kamino was expunged from Republic records, wasn't it?
That's right.
So who's to say it's not been renamed something else now, that all of a sudden there's something else on there. So yeah. I wanted to ask you one question. I sell toys for a living, and once you've been in this world for a certain amount of time, a bit like what I was talking about, how you can see that certain things have been done deliberately within the Mandalorian to kind of appeal to the wider people, to make it as inclusive as possible. You don't want to necessarily make it to the fan, because the fan's going to watch it regardless. Yeah. You want to bring all these extra people in there, so you make it a universal appeal. You become a little bit cynical because you can see things going on, but equally done to divert attention. And where I'm going with this is, you've launched Disney Plus in your main territory, North America, and you've released this and not on a global platform to maximize the sales. You know that it's going to get out there without you necessarily benefiting from the revenue of that.
Yeah.
However, has this been done at a point where we're building up for the next installment of the films, but I don't think that there is a lot of enthusiasm there for the films? And I'll give you an example. It occurred to me the other day that it's not that I never go to the cinema, but this is the first time I've not seen a Star Wars trailer in one form or another on a big screen ahead of its release. I haven't seen any version of The Rise of Skywalker as a trailer in cinema this year. Suddenly that occurred to me. We saw Terminator Dark Fate the other day. I was half expecting it to be on there, and nothing. I'm not seeing much in the way of marketing push, at least in the UK, of stuff, either through merchandise sales, toys, or otherwise. I'm just not seeing a lot of things there. Now, is that because there is something else at play there, or has this always been the case that we're releasing The Mandalorian and they are bringing this on board to then create not so much a smokescreen, but build huge enthusiasm for this, so that you're going into The Rise of Skywalker really on a high off the back of The Mandalorian in particular? But is it almost that it's a marketing tool in itself?
That's a good question. That only works if you are focusing on the States, because outside of the States, with very few exceptions, I think Holland and Australia and New Zealand have got it, but I don't think anybody else has.
But that's my point. That's my point.
Yeah.
You would hold out for this until you can roll out this to at a global level to get that revenue. The loss of revenue by getting this out in limited territories, knowing it's going to get pirated or streamed or shared, you're not getting anything for that. Your money's sunk into producing this episode, but are they offsetting that as a marketing cost potentially for The Rise of Skywalker? Otherwise, if it was a global roll out for the 1st of March or whatever, 2020, then bang, you're getting millions.
Yeah. Because everyone will have access to Disney Plus by the time, let's say, Kenobi comes out. That will be a genuine global event.
Yeah.
And there's no film coming. But for this, I suppose in the States, you've got Mandalorian and it leads you into Rise of Skywalker, and everyone's going to be on a high because Mando's going so well and people are generally reacting to it very favourably. So in that sense, I think you're right. That can only be good for Rise of Skywalker, leading into its opening box office weekend, which is really what counts these days. For the rest of the world, there's a dissatisfaction that we're not getting it, but I think most people kind of understand that there's more factors to why they're not getting it than just...
Oh, sure, but they are getting it.
Well, yeah, and so what
Truth be told.
What I think is that you look at... All right, we've just talked about the yodeling. They're about to go nuts on marketing and getting products out for that character. It already feels like he's the character that most people are going to gravitate to, even though I look at The Mandalorian as a series, and I think from a marketing point of view, in its isolation, because if they do 3 3/4 and they've already done a 6-inch, a range of figures to go with The Mandalorian, kids can play with that Mandalorian character with all their other Star Wars action figures and make their own stories up, which is what you kind of think they would do. But in his isolation, it's almost like it's almost like the same reason why they never sold many Indiana Jones toys, because beyond Indy, who cares? So they've got to get it right. Which is why I think they've nailed it, bringing in Baby Yoda, because they can do plush versions and every other version, talking versions, and he'll turn up on an app and he'll be everywhere, and you'll be sick and tired of it by the time they're done with the character. But yeah, it almost feels like a lost leader. It's like going into a supermarket and the bread and sugar's on sale because it wants to get you to buy the steak. And I suppose in this instance, the steak is the Rise of Skywalker because they want to break some records if they can. And also I think they've almost made a misstep in the sense that I think it's great we've not got another big screen movie for 3 years. I think that's a good thing, but we're going to have at least 3 more TV series, if not more.
If we didn't have The Mandalorian right now, we'd be saying, oh, we're excited for Rise of Skywalker.
Clone Wars Season 7 and Rise of Skywalker, yeah.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be seeing much going on marketing otherwise. If we didn't have The Mandalorian right now, would you be seeing Rise of Skywalker? Is it visible compared to what you had with The Force Awakens, with Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, with Last Jedi? This, at the moment, I would actually personally argue that Solo was even more visible than Rise of Skywalker leading into the film. I think there is a real lack at the moment, and like The Mandalorian is building up that enthusiasm. They know they've got a home run there.
Yeah.
It's building up that enthusiasm. That's then getting everybody excited for Star Wars. So then when a Star Wars film comes out, like you say, it's breaking all these records, hopefully, at its release. But without that at the moment, I'm not really seeing the buzz that we'd normally see. You've got like an Empire cover, you've got a couple of magazines. Normally, by now, it's getting everywhere. And we've not really seen that. Last Jedi, arguably, it was all about the Porgs and it was all about the Praetorian Guards.
Yeah.
You saw those images everywhere. You saw the product everywhere. You didn't know what they related to, but you knew that was related to The Last Jedi. Not seeing a lot on Rise of Skywalker, and that's kind of worrying.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, I've got the latest issue of Empire magazine. There's a mag looking back at 40 years of Star Wars. There's a dark ray print. Beautiful Paul Shipper cover, which is great. Total Film's got the film on the cover. Toot my own horn here. The latest issue of Starburst has got my cover article all about Rise of Skywalker. So there is stuff out there. But yeah, you're right. I think a big problem that they've got, and it's marketing, is they marketed it as the end. And it worked for Avengers Endgame, but we know that Avengers Endgame isn't the end because Spider-Man came out straight after Black Widow was out in February. We just knew it was the end of that storyline, but they've marketed Rise of Skywalker as the end of the Star Wars saga, the end of the Skywalker saga as we call it now. So they're very much marketing it as a full stop, and it's a bit like Marvel relaunching the Star Wars title from issue 1. As much as it's, everyone's going to want to get issue 1 of Star Wars, there's also a lot of people, that's a jumping off point. That's easy. I can step away now. And I know comic retailers who are having real trouble because comic sales are down because they see issue 75 of Star Wars as a jumping off point. So I'm stepping away now. Star Wars has a risk of that. We're knowledgeable Star Wars fans. We know Kenobi's coming, Cassian's coming, Season 7 Clone Wars is coming. There'll be a sequel or a successor series animated to Resistance because that's finishing after just 2 seasons. So, we know there's all this stuff coming, but the general public don't know that. They probably don't know there's not another Star Wars film for 3 years. So it does feel like, from a marketing point of view, they want to put a big cap on it, but also it just feels like they've I don't know, they box themselves into a corner almost. And you're absolutely right, there's nowhere near as much Star Wars talk or visibility as there has been for the other films, and I'm not quite sure why. Farthest From, as we speak, is this coming weekend. We've already announced, or on the previous episodes, some of the guests that are coming. Daniel Barker, Matthew Downs, Simon Downs. Who else have we got, Dave?
Sam the Stormtrooper, and she's done a million things, contributed a million different characters and roles in all the Disney area films.
Exactly, and the cool thing is, after you announced it and we put it on Fantatrax, they put that picture out last week of her in that scene with Oscar Isaac on the Rebel base, or Resistance base, where so many people noted that she was the one character that was looking down because it almost looks like she's checking her phone, which is kind of funny. So everyone's talking about Sam, so you couldn't have timed that better.
And we've also got Paul McHugh for his first ever signing as the Rebel MP from Yavin 4, a scene in Rogue One, a Star Wars story.
Yes.
Yeah, we got five guests for the day. We've also got a lot of games taking place. So we've got the Moncal Carnival games that you can participate in. An exhibit, which is the unproduced toys of the Phantom Menace. So we've got a little micro exhibit there. We've also got Oliver Steeples from the R2 Builders popping down with his version of R2KT. So he'll have that on display there, which is really cool to see. But it's also the Christmas light switch on in the town as well, which if you're a fan of football or I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, Harry Redknapp is switching on the lights. It's a great big street carnival, and it's also our 10th anniversary, as all the cool stuff. So on Thursday of this week, we opened our doors 10 years ago to Fordingbridge, so it's tying in the sort of birthday celebration. So 10 years of all the cool stuff, Christmas light switch on with Harry Redknapp, and Fantha Day on the Saturday, with Farthest From following on the Sunday. I mean, what more could you want?
Nothing. That's literally everything I want. Well, the only other thing I want is I'm hoping the cake shop's open, because I always buy a nice cake from the cake shop. But other than that, I'm completely satiated for my Star Wars needs.
Exactly. That's what we want.
Awesome. Can't wait. And we'll talk about it more at length in the next episode. We'll have audio from the show and the weekend and all sorts of crazy stuff. So stay tuned to Fantatrax and Making Tracks, and there's going to be content coming from Farthest From 21. Can't wait. So that's it for episode 24 of Making Tracks. Me and Dave, I think we've put the world to rights, or at least the Star Wars galaxy to rights. We talked about The Mandalorian, and we talked about Farthest From, so there's nothing more to say, other than, if you want to listen...
I have spoken.
Well, there you go. You can't top that. Why didn't I think of that? You can find Fantatrax Radio on fantatrax.com. You can contact us by emailing radio@fantatrax.com, or you can comment on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, or Tumblr. And if you want to listen to us, which I really, really hope you do, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Google Podcasts, on Stitcher, on Android. You can listen to us on Spotify, on SoundCloud, subscribe on TuneIn, listen on iHeartRadio or on Spreaker. You can find us on smart speakers such as Amazon Alexa, which is awesome because just say give me Star Wars news and Fantatrax stuff starts coming out of it. Apple HomePod, Google Home and Sonos. You can also get us in your car with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, or on your gaming consoles and television. And of course you can find us on Fantatrax TV on YouTube, where there's a new video every Wednesday and Saturday, or on the Fantatrax app, which is awesome. And for all the details, go to our dedicated landing page on fantatrax.com. So that's it for the episode. Dave, is there anything you need to say before we wander off into the twin sunset?
Jawas are misunderstood. They might seem like jerks, but really, they're great people.